The wind pulled across the flight line in ragged pulses, dragging sheets of powder snow over the concrete as if trying to erase it. The temperature sat well below freezing, the kind of cold that burned through gloves and made every breath bloom like smoke. Engines from the alert side hangars were already spinning up, heat bleeding into the snow in short-lived gusts. Each aircraft sat gleaming under the low winter sun, their outlines sharp in the ice-blued haze. Callie stood beside the second-to-last FA-18 Super Hornet in the outermost row. Her boots were sunk slightly into the snow-packed runoff at the edge of the pad, heels steady, toes pointed toward the line. Her olive-drab flight suit was zipped to the collar, cuffs stiff from exposure. The legs faded and pressed white along the creases. Her gloves hung from her belt loop, fingers curled inward, stitched leather catching light with each gust of wind. Her blonde hair was tied back cleanly behind her neck. No flyaways. No statement. She hadn't moved in several minutes. Inside the alert trailer, where heat shimmered in fogged window panes and the scent of instant coffee overpowered jet fuel, 3 pilots leaned against the back bench, watching the ramp through condensation. One of them elbowed the other. "She's still out there?" he asked. The second glanced up, squinting, like a statue. "That jet's cold. They're not even fueling it." The third pilot grinned and said, "They probably stationed her up here to keep the metal from rusting. Cold storage." Laughter rattled off the bench cushions. No one lowered their voice. The digital scramble board rotated names every 10 seconds, glowing orange across the front panel. Callie's name never appeared. The other pilots had call signs, nicknames etched in permanent marker along helmet bags and locker tags. Callie had none of that. Her nameplate had been moved to the storage side of the locker room 2 weeks ago. The helmet she had trained in was still locked inside, a padlock slightly fogged from temperature change. She hadn't touched it since arrival. Snow hissed past her boots. The FA-18 beside her had not been powered in over 36 hours. Ice framed the leading edge of the intakes, and a translucent sheet of frost dulled the canopy. The flight ladder was still latched up, and the pitot covers had not been removed. No airman had performed a walk-around. No ground crew had so much as placed a power cart nearby. A few meters behind her, a junior technician exited the tower's side door with his parka unzipped and his phone raised. He caught the shot quickly, her outline beside the ice-cased Super Hornet, wind curling snow around her boots, and posted it to the crew chat. The caption under the image read, "Benchwarmer Barbie, frozen at the gate." No one told her. No one needed to. She adjusted nothing. Her stance didn't change. Her gaze stayed fixed toward the end of the runway, where heat shimmered under the active jets now taxiing into formation. The wind shifted slightly and pushed a wall of powder across the lower pad. The snowflakes struck her legs and flight suit without notice. She blinked once. Her hand moved to the gloves at her belt, only to touch them briefly. The hangar behind her buzzed with motion. Radios called out fuel stats, engine clearance codes, wind warnings. Inside the heated ready room, crew rotated through the coffee machine. One captain in an unzipped parka leaned near the window and pointed out toward her silhouette. "She trying to log time by proximity." Another officer laughed. "She's probably waiting for someone to tell her she can come in." The inside air was dry and hot, piped in through underfloor vents. Faces shone pink from heat. Names rolled across the board again. None of them were hers. Outside, the frost was building along the edges of her aircraft's rear stabilizers. The snowdrifts along the pad had been cleared that morning, but they returned fast, building in the crosswind that tunneled between hangars. Callie's boots were partially buried now. Her shadow stretched long across the concrete. She hadn't spoken to anyone since first light. Near the edge of the mobile maintenance trailer, a group of mechanics finished fueling a different FA-18. One of them, an older crew chief with frost on his lashes, gave her a look over his shoulder. "She waiting for someone to notice her," he muttered. The other shrugged. "That jet's not even on the board." "She's not either." The first tech snorted, then wiped his gloves against his knees. "She's going to lose circulation standing out there like that." But she didn't shift. Not when the cold lifted the edge of her flight suit collar. Not when the comms tower hissed out another pilot rotation. Not when the alert horn tested at 85 decibels for the third time that morning. She stayed beside the aircraft. Not against it. Not leaning. Just standing with precision. Like she was already halfway in motion. When the afternoon sun finally breached the ridgeline, the ice on the FA-18's canopy began to halo. It did not melt. It refracted the light, casting thin arcs across the snow below. Callie's shadow cut through one of them like a clock hand pointing at idle. Inside the trailer, another name was called. A pilot opened the side locker for his helmet and unzipped his boots. No one called hers. No one turned to check. In the hallway near the stairwell, someone shouted over laughter. "That one's iced." She didn't flinch. The wind pushed her hood against the back of her flight suit. Her hands stayed low and even. She looked once more toward the end of the runway and adjusted the gloves at her side. The sun slipped behind the low clouds again, and the light turned to blue. Behind her, the base stayed warm. Inside, they kept laughing. She faced the line and did not move. The desk was metal and square, set beneath a frosted wall vent that hissed softly through the night. A small lamp cast light across the surface, turning the laminated schematic into a dull rectangle flecked with tape marks and pencil shadow. The schematic showed the FA-18's start sequence, panel, trim, toggles, fuel isolation, backup, bleed air. Its corners had begun to curve from use, the plastic wrinkled where her fingertips had pressed too often at the same switch positions. Callie sat upright, shoulders square, spine aligned with the edge of the chair. Her stopwatch ticked once every second, the small red hand stuttering forward with mechanical clicks. She held a folded notepaper in one hand, thumb bracing its creases, the other hand hovering just above the table as if feeling for controls. On the tray beside her sat 2 spare batteries, a coil of thermal wrap, and a cloth to wipe frost from contacts she never touched. The checklist was hers, written in pencil, step by step, not copied from a binder, but memorized through repetition, then inscribed in careful lines after lights out. It began with the battery master and ended with full throttle clearance. Each motion had been practiced in silence, not just once, but every night since arrival. No one asked for it. No one logged it. She timed herself anyway. She tapped the stopwatch and moved. Her hand swept across the table in a practiced arc. Fuel isolation, APU start, throttle gate, right finger for backup air, left index along imaginary panel lines. Her eyes stayed shut, her breath slow. When the stopwatch crossed 19 seconds, she stopped. She reset. She waited for her breathing to settle. Then she did it again. There were no alarms in her room, no television, no sound except the wind tapping against the vent. The walls were paneled in gray and carried the chill from outside. Her gloves were tucked under her pillow, palms pressed together to stay warm. The only color in the room came from the faded orange band on the stopwatch and the edge of an old battery tag tucked into the tray corner. She stood slowly and crossed to the shelf above the bunk. 3 binders. One held printed manuals. The others were blank. She opened the second and slid the notepaper inside, then tapped the page once to flatten it. The stopwatch went into the tray. The boots went on without a sound. She wore them without socks. Laces wrapped once, twice, tied low across the ankle to reduce pressure. She slid into her parka, but left it unzipped. Her fingers ran along the back of the zipper just to check for a snag she had reinforced last week. She stepped out of the bunk room and into the corridor. The lights were dimmed for night shift. Fluorescent fixtures buzzed faintly. No one else moved through the hallway. Her footfalls were soft. The rubber soles gripped against cold tile as she passed the sleeping quarters. The mess. The empty ready room. She pushed the door open with her shoulder and stepped into the dark. Outside, the cold returned with full force. Wind curled around the edges of the hangar buildings, dragging snowflakes like grit. The sky was flat black, no stars, just the yellow blink of a perimeter beacon and the distant red pulse of tower warning lights. Her breath clouded in short bursts. She kept her pace even, her boots crunching through patches of refrozen snow. She walked the same route each night, along the far edge of the hangar row, past the generator tanks, across the rear pad, and then up the central lane between parked aircraft. The snow here was deeper, drifts collected in corners. Ice slicked the metal stairs that led to catwalks she never used. She passed the first jet in silence, then the second. Her steps slowed by the time she reached the third. It was hers. The FA-18 sat dormant under a pale arc light, its surface dusted with fine frost. Snow had collected along the air intake lips and under the rear stabilizer. The canopy was sealed and dull, the seams between panels outlined in ice. She stopped beside it. She did not touch it yet. She tilted her head back slightly to trace the nose cone. Her gaze followed the fuselage line to the exhaust nozzles. Then she stepped to the ladder, eyes pausing at each rung. She was not here to climb. She was here to remember. Her right hand raised, fingers tracing a panel in the air about shoulder height, where the external power panel would sit. She made no sound. Her glove stayed in her belt. She mimed the battery toggle with her fingertip, then the throttle cutout, then the master ignition, then the oxygen test tap. She paused. The wind shifted and blew snow past her feet. She closed her hand and brought it back to her side. She circled once around the jet. No shortcuts. She stopped by the rear landing gear, knelt briefly, and pressed her hand to the snow beside the tire. The snow gave easily. The tire was cold. She stood again and returned to the forward edge. Her boots left only faint impressions in the powder. Her face was pale in the light, the wind turning the ends of her hair across her collar. She placed her hand against the lower side panel and left it there for 2 seconds. Then she turned away. The walk back was slower, not from fatigue, but from something steadier. The base was silent. Her breath no longer smoked. Her fingertips were numb. Back inside, the bunkroom light was still on. She closed the door softly, removed the boots, sat at the desk, lifted the schematic once more, and started again. The siren did not begin gradually. It struck the air like metal on glass, a blare so sharp it seemed to split the clouds. Inside the scramble trailer, mugs were dropped mid-pour. The heater fan shut off. Doors opened with a slam as personnel bolted toward their assignments. The wind caught the corner of a loose chart and sent it cartwheeling across the snow, vanishing under a maintenance truck. The board lit orange and red. Names cycled faster than usual. The alert was not announced as a drill, and no one asked. From the hangar mouth, crew chiefs shouted out call signs. Pilots grabbed helmets. A tech near the east wing slipped on the ice and kept moving. In the crush of motion, no one said Callie's name. She was already moving. The air burned cold as she stepped past the edge of the shadow line, boots pressing fresh tracks into the frost. The wind carried the siren at full volume across the tarmac. Snow blew low, curling around her knees and flicking up in thin arcs behind her legs. She did not jog. She did not signal. Her hands were bare. One crew leader at the junction point glanced up from his comms tablet and raised his voice. "You're not on scramble. Hold position." She did not respond. Her path never changed. Inside the main gear locker, her helmet was still locked in place. The padlock remained frozen, untouched. She had passed it without slowing. Her gloves were still hooked through her belt loop. The other pilots were shouting over one another as they hauled open side lockers and yanked thermal covers off their aircraft. Tower comms barked instructions that cut in and out over the speaker. "Stand by for vector allocation. All authorized crews check in immediately. Confirm board status." Her aircraft was not listed. Its slot read inactive. Its external cabling had not been connected. The ladder was up. The panel snow had not been brushed clear. Frost filmed the canopy so thickly that the frame edge disappeared into white. "Jet 5 isn't spun," someone shouted. "It's iced. That one's dead. She's not even cleared." They said it loud enough for each other. Not for her. Callie passed the rear stair, turned sharply at the fueling skid, and crossed directly into the cold zone. No one followed. A group of enlisted techs paused by the power sled, one of them holding a fuel line in hand, half-coiled and dripping meltwater. They stared as she stepped toward the forgotten Super Hornet. "You're not even on the sheet," one said. Another lifted his comm link. "Tower, be advised. Jet 5 is being approached by unauthorized." His voice trailed off as Callie reached the ladder. Her hand touched the metal. The rungs were ice-laced and bit into her palm, but her grip held. She climbed in one motion, not rushed, not pausing, her boots knocking soft clinks against the side panel as she moved. At the top, she paused only long enough to check the canopy seam. The frost was still intact. No one had touched it. She keyed the release lever manually and slid herself into the seat. The cockpit was black. No startup tones. No HUD. The inside temperature was below freezing. She exhaled once through her nose and watched the breath bloom, then dissipate in front of her visorless face. Back on the ground, the junior tech still held his comm unit in the air. "Tower, this is line crew on pad 7. Someone is in Jet 5. Repeat, cockpit is occupied." The tower replied with static. Is that even possible? Another voice asked. She doesn't have a helmet. Someone muttered. What is she doing? The air had dropped lower still. One of the overhead yard lights began to buzz, flickering against the snowy wind. Jet 3 on the adjacent pad was beginning its startup. The heat shimmered off the ground behind it as its turbines roared into a slow whine. Callie's aircraft remained silent. Then the canopy sealed. It locked with a subtle click that none of them could hear, but all of them felt. Inside, she moved. Her gloves remained at her belt. Her hands settled onto the controls with practiced ease. She adjusted the trim switches by feel. APU switch, fuel prime, throttle position, oxygen circuit bypass. The sequence began. Not a checklist. A motion. One of the tower officers leaned closer to the window. Voice low. She's not even logged in. She's not on the run sheet. Check the pad record. Another said, What's her name again? Callie? No last name. Just Callie. The light above Jet 5 blinked. The APU indicator lit amber, then green. The sound came seconds later, a staggered churn, then a sharper whir. The right engine coughed once, then caught. The left followed. Snow blasted from the side channels as the FA-18 came alive. The frost on the canopy streaked back in diagonal lines as heat built beneath it. Her fingers moved again. Flap check. Brake release. Taxi ready. The wheels unlocked. The Super Hornet pulled forward. The ground crew stepped back. She's rolling, someone whispered. Tower voice cracked into the comm system. Who cleared Jet 5? No one answered. Callie did not respond. The siren still rang as she lined up with the far lane. Her nose dipped, then lifted slightly. The sound of her turbines overtook the rest of the pad. Rotors beat behind her. Voices failed. She braced, the brake released fully. The aircraft surged forward. In the time it took for the tower to repeat its own question, she was already airborne. And the siren was still blaring. Inside the cockpit, it was colder than outside. The metal around the throttle had collected a skin of frost so thin it crunched when her fingers pressed to it. Callie moved without pause. Her gloves stayed clipped at her side. Her bare hands worked fast and clean. The switches didn't need labels anymore. She had memorized their spacing by inches, not sight. Fuel isolation toggled with her thumb. The APU starter came next, levered into position with the edge of her palm. Bleed. Air. Open. Oxygen switch. Bypassed. Battery master live. No lights came on yet, but the pulse of startup energy had begun. Outside, a crew tech shouted toward the tower. She's not even powered. But then the intake fan spooled. One of them hit the tarmac running. His boots left divots in the ice-slick pad as he stopped 10 meters short, shielding his face from the turbine blast. The indicator lights along the port side housing flicked green. The snow at the base of the Super Hornet flared outward in twin arcs as heat pushed from the engines in growing volume. Callie continued the sequence. Her fingers swept over the nav feed that wasn't there. She did not need it. Her head tilted once to check canopy seal. Frost was still curling across the upper right pane, but the lower edge had already begun to drip in uneven lines. APU gave the first cough, then a steady rising whine. The cockpit panel glowed faint orange. She tapped the throttle up one notch. The left engine turned over. Snow blasted back. The turbine whine deepened into a full-throated growl. Ice shattered off the nose cone. The fan blades inside caught speed and roared louder. The right engine came alive next. The whine rose above the tower's channel feed, drowning out the scramble chatter. She's not cleared to fly, someone muttered in the background. No one in the tower responded. Callie toggled the flaps. The right side stuttered for half a second before falling into sync. She tested the brakes. They hissed once, stiff from cold, then caught. The runway strip ahead was still half occupied by a fueling cart. She watched for 2 seconds. The driver yanked the brake lever and gunned the engine out of the way. She released the brakes. The Super Hornet rolled forward. Her hands stayed light on the controls. Her breathing came in short, measured draws, fogging the inside of the glass. She didn't wipe it. It cleared in the middle as the heat caught. The frost lifted in segments. Each panel shimmered for a second before turning clear. Her fingertips did not fumble. There was no double check. She tapped the internal generator. Trim adjusted. Gear pressure held. Outside the canopy, technicians had stopped moving. One man in a high-vis vest stood halfway through a radio call and never finished it. Another with a headset pulled his mic away and simply stared. The scramble trailer door swung open again and stayed that way. A young pilot leaned out, eyes narrowed, jaw slack. The jet aligned with the forward strip. The crosswind was light. Runway clearance had not been issued. She didn't need it. Her hands never lifted from the throttle. Turbines hit full draw. The snow behind her peeled into corkscrews. Exhaust hammered against the side wall of a refueling sled, knocking the lid open. One of the flight crew crouched down instinctively, arms raised to shield his face, not from debris, but disbelief. "She's going," someone said. No one else spoke. The engine screamed, the nose dipped, the tires flexed once. She pushed throttle past gate. Acceleration slammed her against the seatback. The sound inside the cockpit collapsed into a single stream of power. The glass above her reflected nothing now, only white. The runway streaked past beneath the wheels. The snow hadn't even fully cleared from the center line. But she didn't need the line. Her sight held true. From the tower, a controller finally found his voice. "Is she already airborne?" No one answered. At the 19-second mark, by one ground crewman's silent count, the wheels lifted from the concrete. The jet rose on a column of heat and force, trailing white in a perfect twin spiral behind it. The canopy gleamed with melt. The stabilizers hissed under pressure. The flaps twitched and locked. The sky waited. She was in it. The sky opened like a slow breath. Just above the cloud shelf, the light was dim and diffused. A pale sheet stretched across the upper atmosphere. Below her, the ice plains rolled in broken ridges. Everything had texture-frozen sea channels, wind-swept flats, fracture lines, shaped like veins. None of it came through a targeting overlay. None of it blinked on a HUD. It was all there because she had studied it, memorized the drift of terrain, the wind shift against open fields, the light scatter off ice when the angle changed. Callie held the nose of the Super Hornet just below the shelf line. Vapor streaked behind her in fine curves, and the engines ran smooth. She made no radio call. Her hands stayed steady on the controls. The nav data was dark. Her helmet had no feed. The cockpit lights were minimal. No tracking pings. No threat warnings. The jet was flying cold, manually, without guidance. She adjusted for wind drift by feel. The correction was slight. Left stick pressure. A touch of trim to stabilize against the early climb bank. The air up here was sharp. Each turn sliced a little cleaner. The aircraft responded like it had been waiting. Below her, the coastline turned. A field of broken sea ice framed the eastern edge of the map she held in memory. The wind vectors at this altitude came from the northwest. That meant the contact, whatever it was, would have drifted south unless it was self-correcting. She adjusted course. There was no trail to follow, no radar ping, no heat lock, but she knew the direction. She had seen the vector on the tower screen for a single second before takeoff. She had studied the timing, the known gaps in coverage. She had imagined this flight before, not in fantasy, but in procedure. And now, it was happening in motion. The contact appeared without announcement. It rose from the edge of a cloud layer, a silhouette pulled from fog. It was sleek, dark, triangular in profile. The size was difficult to gauge at this distance, but it flew low and silent, just a shade darker than the snow sky behind it. Not a bird, not a local craft. Something fast, something placed. She didn't break line. She adjusted power and stayed behind the trailing edge, far enough to avoid crosswash, close enough to count the sway of its arc. The unknown aircraft didn't shift altitude. It held course for several seconds, then tipped slightly left. Callie matched it. The Super Hornet didn't buck or sway. The trim was perfect. Her corrections were invisible. Her line curved like paint across still water. From the tower, static pulsed once in her ear. Unidentified aircraft. Call sign. Who is airborne? Repeat. Who is in the sky? She answered with no inflection. One visual, confirming identity. Her voice didn't shake. Her hand didn't lift from the throttle. She adjusted her vector half a degree and held. The aircraft ahead began to climb. It curved up. Not fast, not evasive. A slow pull. A kind of test. She followed. Her altimeter remained dark. She didn't need the number. The horizon dipped below the canopy glass, and the clouds began to thin. As they broke the shelf line, sunlight filtered through hazy gold over blue. She came level again and held position. No lock-on, no tracking, just formation. One black shape, one white. Her jet moved in perfect rhythm beside it. She leaned forward slightly. The canopy glass remained clean, the fog finally gone. Her visor caught the shadow of the other aircraft's outline. It was unmanned. No visible canopy. Sleek and quiet. A drone, or something similar. It turned right. She stayed with it. The horizon stretched endless. The air flattened. No traffic, no contrails. Just the two aircraft rising and falling in the same arc. The quiet was complete. Behind her, the base remained below the clouds. They could see her on radar now, but they wouldn't understand the pattern. They wouldn't know why she was there. No one had sent her. No one had tracked her launch time. She didn't belong to the log. Only the sky recognized her. The aircraft turned once more, heading due east. She followed another 30 seconds, then held position again. She tapped the mic. Confirmed. Visual held. She didn't say more. The other jet continued on. She maintained course just behind it, silent, steady, alone. The tires hit the runway with a single, clean impact. No flare, no delay. The touchdown came low and perfect, nose aligned, no bounce. The wheels rolled over a thin patch of cleared snow, carving two faint lines into the frost as the FA-18 slowed. Her air brake held steady. No voice announced her arrival. No tower called priority. She didn't ask. The jet coasted through the wind shear, past a frozen fuel rig, toward the lower corner of the ramp. The engines dropped pitch. The flaps lifted slowly. When the aircraft turned at the final taxi line, its canopy glass reflected the tower above it, frosted edges, light haze, and the silent blur of personnel moving behind glass. She parked in the same slot where the flight had started. Jet 5, unassigned. No ground crew came to greet her. No one opened the ladder. For a long second, nothing happened. Then the turbines wound down. One rotation, then the next. Callie raised the canopy and stood. The wind touched her immediately. Cold air swept across the cockpit, lifting the ends of her hair and pushing the warmth from her flight suit. She didn't shiver. She climbed down, each rung taking her back to the ground one slow step at a time. Her boots met snow that hadn't been there when she launched. Across the pad, 5 crew members watched. One held a headset but didn't speak. Another leaned forward slightly, hands at his sides, like he expected her to say something. She didn't. She stepped back from the aircraft, turned, and walked past them. Inside the tower, the screen showed her return vector. The trace was razor sharp. The flight path curved out, leveled, tracked the contact, and held distance, then return. No diversions, no warnings, no chatter. Her identifier was missing, but the system had logged it as unknown, a yellow box without a name. Someone finally pressed play on the security feed. The launch replay stuttered once, then began. Callie entered the frame just as the siren sounded. She crossed the ramp with no helmet, no gloves, no escort. Her movements were quiet, straightforward. When she reached the ladder, she climbed without pause. From canopy seal to liftoff, 19 seconds passed. A young analyst ran the time code again. He didn't speak. The senior officer in the room stood behind him with arms folded. His eyes stayed on the screen. "That's not possible," the officer said quietly. No one argued. In the far corner of the tower, one mechanic sat watching the secondary feed. The external panel camera had caught the moment of startup. One light blinked green, then 2, then full engine fire. The aircraft launched like it had been running for an hour. The mechanic leaned back slowly in his chair. Outside, steam lifted from the top of the Super Hornet. The heat had melted part of the frost along the inlet. A small puddle formed beneath the exhaust vents, barely visible in the patchy snow. The aircraft looked exactly the same as it had before the launch, except for that warmth and the silence around it. Callie crossed the main walkway in view of 2 hangar techs still standing by the secondary fuel bay. One of them lifted a hand halfway, then lowered it. He opened his mouth to ask something. Didn't. She passed them without stopping. The tower board updated. For the first time, Her tail number appeared on screen. No call sign, just Jet 5. The tag shifted into the scramble record under a block titled Resolved. It stayed there for 3 seconds, then cleared. No one reset it. In the command tent, the final report was being written. A placeholder line showed pilot unknown. No override came through. The contact Callie had followed was tagged as friendly test drone. No further action required. The other pilots were still in debrief. Not one of them had left the building. The base had gone quiet. Her gloves hung from her belt again, right where they had been before. She passed the edge of the ramp where the first photo had been taken. The junior tech who had posted it still had his phone out. This time, he didn't lift it. She slowed once, just before the scramble trailer. Inside, someone had left the door open. The heat from within spilled faint light across the snow. A man stood just inside the frame, shoulders braced against the door. He had been one of the first to laugh. He didn't say anything now. Callie adjusted the gloves at her side. The snow caught the cuff of her boot. Her footsteps left fresh prints across the same ground they had dismissed her from hours before. She didn't stop. She didn't explain. And no one tried to stop her. She never asked for recognition. She never raised her voice. While others chased validation, she chose quiet preparation. In a world that mistook stillness for weakness, she proved that true strength does not need permission to act. Callie's flight was not just a launch, it was a lifetime of discipline, precision, and belief finally made visible. They overlooked her because they never looked closely. But in 19 seconds, she showed what readiness really means. This is a story for anyone who has been dismissed, doubted, or ignored. A reminder that you do not have to be loud to be powerful. Sometimes the most important things are done without applause. If this story moved you, share what it meant to you in the comments. And if you believe in the strength of quiet reversals, follow for more stories like this where dignity takes flight.